I was previously at Clorox as a cybersecurity program manager. And one of the fun things we did was we not only changed out all the firewalls for the company, we changed out all the malware, antivirus, and also the identity and access management solution in less than 18 months. So we have some fun stories about some of the challenges the network felt once we started turning up the antivirus and malware protection. So if we have time, I think we've got some stories in the audience as well about some of the impacts of some of the security tools. But what I wanted to do is just keep this very focused. I had a good discussion with a few people about endpoint, and essentially endpoint protection as an entry point for a security role. And when I started having this discussion, I very quickly realized that I didn't, a lot of people didn't really understand what the scope of that was. So I've dropped out a few of the architecture slides out of here. I'm going to try to keep this very crisp and very focused. For those of you who don't know me, though, I welcome questions. Please interrupt. It's nice to be up here chatting, but if this isn't a productive discussion for you, I can answer a question, I'd prefer it to be productive, as so we can get to dinner quicker as well. So here's essentially the agenda. Definitely want to go through the definitions and the examples of malware, ransomware, and APTs. Not going to go too far into the examples. Some of the examples I've chosen are actually 3 or 4 years old, but chosen for a reason. I think that they really were the platform for sort of what I call the noise in the media for some of the malware activities. And so when we talk to our businesses, we talk to our leadership, they ask us questions about malware that, quite frankly, dealt with things that they don't understand is, a few years old, and that technology really doesn't bother us anymore. So I want to give a few examples and use that as sort of a springboard forward. And then I also want to focus on the endpoint security and vulnerability points. I pulled out most of the examples of the endpoint protection vendors because I don't think we're going to have enough time. But then I want to get into what the challenges are for the security operations teams and their roles. It's not only budget, funding, et cetera, but just what it's like to work across the IT organization as you're trying to deploy these tools initially, and then as you try to configure and essentially evolve them, some of the challenges we run into. So this is my favorite starter. Malware, a generic term for a number of different types of malicious code. So when people say, hey, I want to get into a security career, and I'm like, great, do you have a software background? And they just look at me and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, malware is code, right? So if you're going to get into a role where you're dealing with antivirus and malware, you're actually going to be reviewing code. And that usually, they either take a couple steps back and, turn around and run, or they, take one step forward. Like this could be really cool. I worked with a guy named Gary Connor at Clorox, and he cracked me up. I mean, not only did he have a C background, but I felt like he was probably going home on the weekends and, hiring himself out to, write malware just for the fun of it. That is obviously a joke, but he was that talented. And some of the things that he taught me were very much in line with the activities that Chris Romeo and a lot of the OWASP folks locally are talking about for software application development. So, that's just sort of my my reminder, and maybe a little bit of a warning as we talk to other people, again, who are trying to break into security. Malware is code. So this is the Cisco Talos intelligence site. I think we all have our own favorite sites. to upgrade. You find a piece of malware, want to go ahead and figure out if somebody else has seen it. This was a big surprise, I think, for some of the folks that I've talked to, that there were these centralized sites, right? Essentially that we are, as a security community, in a much better place than we were 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was, 2014, I had 2 engineers who were working on malware, and they worked on first and second shift. And I asked them to just write down on a piece of paper what the names of the files they were working on. I wasn't going to ask them to put it in Excel. I knew they were busy enough. Because what I realized based on their emails to me was they were working on the same things at different times. They were frustrated. They didn't get along that well. So, it was one of those things, you take them out for a beer and you say, okay, guys, we have to figure out how to centralize the platform, and get some sort of interim solution, because essentially you're doing the same jobs, the exact same work in alternative shifts, and it's not your fault. You should have seen the looks on their face. It was like the stress levels was just coming down. So I ordered another pitcher of beer, because back then we were still doing pitchers. And they were like, thank you, right? I think that they actually thought if anybody realized they were working on the same files and identifying the same code, because obviously we had, I think it was 15 or 16 things that were pretty malicious that we just couldn't get rid of, that one of them might get let go, right? So I blame the tools. I don't, necessarily, I'm going to leave the manager out of it, because I think he was completely clueless as to the amount of work these guys were doing. But the tool sets and what we look at, I just put in Carbon Black a couple years ago, and I was just talking to a few folks. Let's face it, Microsoft is probably passing them, right? So as we look at the vendors and the ability to analyze and communicate back to the security operations team, we're in a much, much better place. It's my hope that databases, et cetera, continue to evolve. But this is the first step, in identifying your tool set, is where's your landing page to make sure the broader security community hasn't seen this file before you get too far down the path. I don't have a comprehensive list of these tools on here. It's probably a good follow-up, but if you have any specific questions, I've got pages of them, so I'm happy to chat with you guys about that later. I've got a few terms that I'm actually going to go ahead and pseudo read the slides, because I want to make sure we're on the same page as far as the definitions. I mean, when I look at the definition for malware across the internet, I actually feel like we've got a few hackers out there having some fun with it. My biggest concern, especially from an overall architecture or a program view, is that when somebody's trying to infect a network, the entire network versus a specific device, there's a completely different risk level to me. If somebody's dumb enough to try to go after the entire network, we're probably going to see it. Whether you're comfortable with your firewalls, whether you're malware, antivirus, whatever you've got in the network nowadays, there's enough triggers that we're going to see it. It's the person who's either going after 2 or 3 people in purchasing with spear phishing emails, or a specific device in a manufacturing plant in LATAM, because everybody thinks that is a vulnerable site based on preliminary scans or something. Again, that's my concern. And I generally have the data to support that. I include the network, though, because not everybody's in an enterprise environment. So, I'm at Cocoa Cinnamon downtown Durham. I'm talking to a startup with 20 people. And it's just interesting. You have to make sure you take a step back and put things in context. I'm not going to make a joke about a Mac versus an IBM, et cetera. It's just a completely different view. So your network architecture and who's essentially looking at you, generally drives the malware specific profiles. And it's pretty easy to figure that out, even if you're a first or second year analyst. I stole these slides from the salespeople because I think they're way cooler than what I could put together, and they show up better in this room. But what I really like about these slides is they call out the peripherals. We've got a smartwatch here. I don't know if any people really do use cameras anymore, but that guy's got a video thing going over there. So, we've got a tablet, we've got a data center. This truly is a good representation. If you go back and you look at your CISSP test materials of the distributed network. I think it's one of the drivers when we talk about what should we allow people to plug into their work computers, right? I mean, should you really allow any USB device, to get attached? So I'm not going to get too far into that, but again, thanks to the Cisco sales team for the screenshot. Ransomware, this is pretty near and dear to my heart just because of what happened down in Charlotte, North Carolina. I think the decision to just pay or not pay is a pretty heart-wrenching one, and ultimately something that the IT teams don't make, right? How many people in this room, if you were the CISO, would pay the ransom? Right? I think most of us wouldn't, right? I think ultimately from a legal ramification, et cetera, that's going to play out in the courts. But think about the security, the SecOps analyst who's in a position to make the call saying, to his line manager or his or her line manager saying, okay, we can't get to the data. So ransomware is going to continue to evolve. I'm just going to go ahead and just keep it tight here. I think the key thing is that they're encrypting the files. The ability to encrypt files, to me, tells me they know more than JSON, and that's why I'm concerned. No matter what antivirus, malware, next-gen firewall you've got, ransomware and APTs are probably going to surpass just general malware. So we're going to have to figure out, as a security community, how essentially, again, we can have some sort of what I call data aggregation and analysis that is happening in the background so that the human resources or people can actually be looking at the things we genuinely care about. When this type of ransomware starts hitting something like every Fitbit, Google just bought Fitbit, right? We're going to see a different reaction from the consumers than we are when we talk about a B2B problem. Interestingly enough, in some of the discussions I've had in the past 10 years, most of the ransomware stuff I've seen has happened between companies. It hasn't been a bad actor from an external, wherever you want to say it is, somebody's living in a basement somewhere or whatever. It was actually between two companies. So that made it even worse because we weren't sure if the security operations teams could really even share the data. You know, it was like, okay, you guys want us to go fix this. The first thing we need to do is drop the connection between the two companies. Are we even allowed to have a conference call? And then APTs. Gaining control of the endpoint resources over an extended period of time. So to me, APTs and ransomware go hand in hand. Generally, unless you have an inside person who says, this is where the data is, this is where it's located, you got to be in the network for a while. So I actually don't like the fact that we have APTs and ransomware. I feel like we need 4, 5, 6 more definitions for malware. So again, I'm not trying to trash the internet and the definition of malware, but I just think that, you know, security and most of the products we use sometimes I feel like are still beta. But the evolution, the malware evolution is just beginning. So these are some of the threats. Any questions yet? So far, nobody's fallen asleep. That's good. Let me know if we need a beer break or something.
Well, that company with ransomware, was that contamination? Or was that somebody deliberately trying to sabotage?
Would you mind repeating it?
In the ransomware, you were discussing it being business to business, not an external bad actor.
Okay.
Was that contamination by somebody who had been exposed, or was this deliberate sabotage of the other company?
So it was actually both. One employee had left one company, gone to the other. The other 3 incidents were just contamination coming across the network. So had this great conversation the first time about what a VPN really was. You know, and they were like, did we, you know, go buy some personal VPN or something for $20 and put it up? So fortunately, I didn't let that go back to the network operations or the security operations team. But that was the massive disconnect, was that the network operations engineer put the VPN in place without talking to the SecOps person. What the SecOps person could have told them is the particular version and type of firewall they were running on the other end actually had a clock problem. So the firewall had a really bad habit of just falling over on the other end. So it was pretty easy for somebody to get in there. And that's how it happened. So target memory scraping malware, right? Memory, right? Going back to software development. I think if people really understood that target, I'll go back up on the thing, sorry. He's having to play around with the video, sorry. That they were actually getting all the data off of their strip on their card, not just the number, right? I think people, when they first were notified, they essentially said, okay, they've got my credit card number, I'll just go ahead and get a new card. They didn't realize that, you know, first name, last name, home address, phone number, and some additional information was included in that. I think if people had really understood the 2-week time frame, because they actually tracked it in the media, about the concern of the consumers, sort of went up and down. It was up pretty high, and then it sort of was, oh, well, that just kind of happens. And what happened was after that malware took their credit card numbers, a lot of consumers said, well, it happened. Now my number's out there, like, what do I do about it? And it made them very apathetic. So that was the start of what I call the noise. Again, that sort of gets into the C-suite. The reason I care about that as a program manager, my number one role is to get money, right? We were just talking about a $10,000 tool one of the security guys wanted. And I was talking to him about it over near the coffee machine. I'm like, yeah, I got that money. Because that's cool, and it's part of I already have money for Endpoint. And he was like, really? And I was like, that's an easy sell, because the rest of the program is $800,000. So now it's 810. It's below my change process. And he just looked at me. He's like, I've been trying to get this for 9 months. And I'm like, well, quick, go spend it. So my point being that if you have somebody with that kind of experience and who has the ability to say, malware, if I can target XYZ malware, put that on a dashboard, because that won't filter back into my malware antivirus software. I need to have my own little custom dashboard, and I need a VM and a few other things. Like, who cares, right? It saved the guy, I think, 12 to 16 hours a week. It's crazy. It was absolutely crazy. And plus, it was cool and it made him happy. So my point is that memory scraping malware, these types of specific malwares, when you go to a vendor and you say, I want to buy your solution, and you ask a specific question like that today, they don't have an answer. What they'll tell you is, don't let it in. That's a firewall problem. I'm like, how can that be a firewall problem? It was it's still in the news. It's still on everybody's mind. Everybody understands the target hack. So if anybody's buying software soon, let me know, and I'll give you a few things just to bother the vendors with. WannaCry. I think, first of all, it always makes me want to cry when I have to spell that, because it's like, why is there a capital C there? I don't really think everybody understood that there was a major Microsoft Windows operating system flaw, right? And that's why it impacted desktops and laptops and servers and whatever. So the consumers were kind of like, okay, what does this do for me? So security operations people and a company totally get it. That's a patching problem, most likely. Here's the issue, and here's my question to this group, because we're going to get into security operation roles and challenges in a little bit, is that who do you think owns the resolution of that? Is that the IT operations team who does the patching? Or would that be the security operations engineer? So who thinks it's the first, the patching team? All right, I like this. So we're about third.
I say it's both.
Okay, I like that. I agree with you, Jason. So I also heard an of course. So tell me why of course.
So the security operations team is responsible for deciding what are the required patches, right?
Yep.
And then, but they're not equipped to actually deploy it against 10,000 servers or 100,000 workstations.
Exactly.
Right. So.
Cool. All right. So the reason I want us to think about that is it's another challenge, though, when I look at the tools and the roles and responsibility when we talk about malware. Most of them are outside of the security operations team's control, okay? My last role, the security operations teams were really cool, so they, quite frankly, had a good relationship with the operations team. The operations team, once, because they were going so fast, they were just going, they had so much on their plate, right? Once they had an opportunity to say, we have a specific problem and could bring that security operations team, we were good. Unless, if it wasn't a specific problem, it was a challenge, time-starved, etc. So let's just go through a few of those examples. I bet you most of you could recite these by heart. Email, I mean, spear phishing is still my biggest concern. I think that the banners that say external email and everything that people are turning on, even though they make email when they print it out like 10,000 pages, everybody agrees are incredibly effective. I was just going to say, I have over 20 examples from companies right before we implemented the policy that they saw a 40% decrease in a month. Just because people were like, oh, I see all this stuff. The reason that I have time to realize it's probably, just make sure it's an external email is that it takes me that long to scroll past all that big red thing saying it's an external email. And that's the second that extra second. And I thought, okay, that's smart. The incoming and the outgoing data and the selective file encryption. Healthcare insurance company in the park. A vendor told them, hey, just go ahead and send us the list of your employees, their home addresses, etc., so we can load them up into this tool. You don't have to tell your SecOps team or anybody because it's just a one-time thing, and then, this is implementation, and then you'll log in, and moving forward, you'll just update that list in our tool, our cloud-based tool. It was like, great. Really? I was like, can we at least pretend SFTP or something? It was local, so I was like, okay, why don't we just put it on an external hard drive, and we drive it over, and that's actually what we did just to be funny. I delayed that implementation. I wasn't even on the team by 6 months just by calling that out, saying this is a challenge. Are you really going to move to this SaaS vendor if that's what they're asking you to do? I'm pretty sure that company still hates me, but that's okay. System access controls, database access controls. So identity and access as a service is a really big thing. If you want to get me on my soapbox, pull me outside. We're all going to these hybrid environments, right? So if you don't have your identity and access solution at both the cloud level and on-prem, I don't care, if you've got Azure, which I always say wrong, with an AD in the cloud and an AD instance on-prem, I don't care where your AD is, right? I mean, AD cleanup is always a different problem. But if you don't have access controls for your general environment that are audited, that you don't have good controls in, that you're not doing cleanup, then you're opening the door to internal bad actors. What's the security operations team going to do about that, right? It's generally driven by finance. So my point is, if you've got USB access to somebody's laptop, they're in a bad mood, there you go, plug it in. They can go ahead and put it on a server. By the time you find it, who knows if they've left the company or whatever, but that's usually, I would guess, quite frankly, at least 2 weeks of seed time. Custom software is the last thing I'm going to talk about. Push, 2-week sprints, agile this. Don't document anything, don't test anything, just get it out, right? Security operations team's not there either. You can download free versions of Atlassian, Jira, Jira, Bitbucket, etc. Keep it on-prem. What my developers usually do is just put it out on GitHub. So I'm like, great. I'm like, okay, who gave you the money to get GitHub? Oh, don't worry about it, it's just the free account. So if you see my spam filter at home, they actually signed me up a few months ago to a pet project they were doing, one of my development teams from a past company. And my spam filter is just catching all kinds of stuff from whatever and whoever got access to their repository. So I'm still ready to kill them. Network segmentation would be a fantastic thing if we could talk Don in the talk. But I'm a huge fan of network segmentation. I think microsegmentation is where it's at. So that's probably another opportunity to talk about it in the future. So the reason I've been talking about this so heavily is that my inbox for LinkedIn is all about, I'm super excited about security and I want to get into it. And that's all I get. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's get you into security. Where do you want to be? And they're like, well, I just want a security job. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean, right? So to me, my career started with network management. I had no idea when we started building out a few years later, network management for wireline, wireless, and I think that's what we started. And then we added optical, a few other things. that wasn't normal, right? So that was my introduction. So to me, the network is where it starts, but that's when you look at the distributed systems that we're in, it's really not the view most of us as IT professionals have anymore, because the network used to be our on-prem red LAN systems. Again, distributed networks, hybrid this, cloud that, right? So security operations teams essentially own what they can, and they only have tools within the perimeter of their network. So the black box solutions that our companies are giving us provide ease of use for our clients, but they give us no visibility. So when we talk about skill set shortage, no time for training, budget concerns, believe it or not, a lot of that stuff as a program manager I can fix. That's exciting to me. This stuff with employee burnout and then the conflict with network and other IT teams, I can't, right? I don't know what to say anymore, because now the business is going out and just getting access to applications on their own, right? They don't even say, hey, should we do an audit? Is it SOC 1 and 2 compliant? I think it's Equinox. Everybody's talking about that right now. Essentially just you're a cross connect away from AWS or Azure, et cetera. I think it's a great business plan because a lot of people need it. A lot of people don't have data centers. But when you talk about endpoint protection, you're completely relying on their black box solution. So I guess just to sum it up, and I don't know how many people who are looking to get into security or know folks, if you truly want to get into an endpoint protection role, you're forever going to have a job, right? There's always going to be these massive challenges, but just remember you're dealing with code. And it's not necessarily, I'm going to configure this, I'm going to replace that. You're going to be in the details. And the tools that you have are going to be 2 or 3 steps behind you, right? So hopefully, I spent a lot of time looking at the NIST framework stuff. I spent a lot of time, the NICE framework is actually very nice. I don't know how many people have had time to look at the NICE framework. When we talk about security roles, that's the first place I send people. And then the second thing I tell them to do is, okay, you want a security job? Go to the NICE framework, because it's very nice. Look at a job role, and then Google it and see if they actually have openings in RTP. Because half the time they're in Washington, D.C. or Seattle, Washington, right? Somebody told me, hey, we want to get you get our business analysts up to speed on security. I'm like, no problem. Let's talk about authentication, right? You need to know that. And they're like, no, we have to create security BAs. And I'm like, well, they're not in the NICE framework. I said, so believe it or not, and this is where I get in trouble with my own personal career. Depending on what I'm working at, I'm really just an infrastructure program manager, software program manager, right? And that drives my CISO nuts. But the reason I say that is that drives me into the architecture, and it gives me touch points across the IT portfolio. And that's how I avoid the challenge that the security operation teams deal with every day. It's also how I get money from the other areas. Because that's the biggest thing. Can I staff? Can I buy stuff? And if I'm supporting software or data management, instead of saying, hey, we're security and we're here to take all your money, it's usually successful. So AMP for Endpoint Protection. I love this product because they have super cool slides. Not going to go too far into it. They have a demo, they have webinars. I told everybody who was coming here you would have homework. And here's my challenge to you. Go out and do 2 webinars. Find 2 endpoint protection products. Go check them out. Read the literature, right? And go to the webinar. And listen to what the salespeople are saying. Because they're going to do a couple of things. Number one, they're not going to talk about who's going to staff and run the platform. Okay? And number two, most importantly, they're not going to talk about your hybrid environment. Okay? What they're going to say is things like laptops or mobile devices, right? And I always challenge them on the mobile devices. I'm like, you don't have coverage there, whether you think you do or not, right? So it doesn't matter how much it is, etc. You've got your own tool set. Whatever the vendor's selling is an addition, right? But malware protection isn't comprehensive. We are behind on most of the security tools, but this is where we are absolutely behind the most, because endpoint protection is truly a solution or a program problem, not just a malware problem. That's why I always get in trouble when I talk about endpoint protection, because I always bring in the firewalls. The reason I bring in the firewalls is because I always have a next-gen firewall problem, in that we're trying to evolve, protect the network, but we also have features that when we turn them on, want to take down the network. So, and I mean that with all the love in my heart. So, see, fly swatter, very cool slides. Reactive, proactive. I do believe that we do have the capability to be proactive with most of our tools. But even if proactive gets us to 5% of what's hitting us, think about those numbers right now for your environments. Even if you've got 20 people, I can't imagine what it is if it's global. I wish I could show the dashboards I've had from the past, and it just blows my mind. If you have somebody who's a great coder and they're tired of developing software, this is a great option for them. And I probably can get them hired tomorrow, so let me know. All right. You've either been, lulled to death by a really long day, or I'm almost ready to wrap this up. So I just really appreciate everybody's time. I want to just open it up for any questions, and then I promise I'll let you go get food. Over here. I'm not that loud, so I have to come over here.
A year or two, all the hype was next-gen endpoint versus
Yep.
the traditional legacy stuff. Is it all hype, or is there some truth to that, and are you moving to
It's actually my favorite topic, so I'm glad you asked. Next-gen firewalls, next-gen capabilities, endpoint solutions aren't available. They're not fully baked. I see them deployed because security operations team do the following. They build their own solutions based on what they have. Whether they, Nathan and I were just talking about, I'm going to use Splunk as the example. I'm not a huge fan of Splunk. I think it's a great tool, but it takes too much time and effort to deploy. But I see teams essentially taking, I think we had, they'll take their antivirus, their malware, and then a custom dashboard that essentially uses NetFlow to pull telemetry from their problem areas, right? And build from there. I've seen a lot of success. The challenge with that is you generally need clean DNS information to try to go find the IP, so you can get the IPs. I've never been in an environment where we had clean DNS, and we're usually a year away from getting it cleaned up. So you'll notice that I'm avoiding talking about the next-gen firewalls. The performance problem of the hardware, they're just not there yet. I think the features and the capabilities are there, but you can't turn them on without impacting your network. So I think you can do it regionally. I just don't think you can do it globally. It's kind of like SD-WAN, everybody wants it. I haven't seen it yet, fully deployed. That's like that and ICS, those are the two things I want to get checked off before I end my career. I think I can do one, I'm not sure I can do the other. But yeah, I mean, we could go through most of the vendors, but I just don't think it's there. I do think security operations teams, though, have the ability, especially if they have the manpower, to build out their own specific custom solutions. So last thing I'll say is, like, one company I know, it's a federal company, built a custom, because the network operations team wouldn't accept the security software. So they just built their own application for the firewalls to do orchestration for the security features, so they could turn them on and off quickly if we saw any network degradation. It worked great. I think it only took them 3 months to build. It was brilliant. So all I can think of is, like, you guys need to lift and shift over, like across the street, get some office space and, sell that to everybody. But I don't know, am I wrong? Does anybody have some next-gen firewalls that they're just cooking and you're really happy with? Okay, or we are being videoed. You can talk to me later. Okay, all right. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.